What's good, TMG fam? It's your boy L, and I'm back with another reaction. How y'all feel? Welcome back to the channel. Salute. So listen, the next video, I heard some of y'all talking about L must have fell asleep during history class. You might be right, but you might be wrong too. So I be coming to real life lore, man. They be having some dope little history lessons and different things you can learn, man. So that's why I be coming here, because I'm still a student. You know what I mean? Even though I ain't in school, I'm still a student. Respect that, all right? So we got to check out this video they made called Why Nobody Wants This Part of Africa, all right? So if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button, join the fam real quick. Moment of silence for the haters. That's enough. Now run the likes up. Make sure y'all hit that like button. Smash it. Let's go.
This is a map of the world, and you'll notice by looking at it long enough that it's completely full of countries. Today, there's at least 195 countries that exist in the world, and at face value, it seems like there isn't anywhere to go besides the world's oceans if you want to get away from all of them. But that isn't really true. If you zoom in close enough and over to the right areas, you'll see that about 1% of Earth's land area remains unclaimed by any country, entity, or person, and theoretically, this 1% of Earth's land is a lawless, uninhabited, and wild zone outside of the control of humanity. For all intents and purposes, these lands are basically on the same legal footing as the surface of the moon. And yet, there are actual places right here that you can go and visit right now. However, most of all this unclaimed land is located right here in Antarctica. It's called Mary Bird Land, and while it's about the same size—
Nope. 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 You ain't gotta worry about me going out there, bro. Nah. I don't like the cold like that. Nope. That's why we down here in the South. Straight up. GA. That's where we play. All day. We ain't going to, no.
As Mongolia, basically just a frozen wasteland right now like the rest of Antarctica, and well, that's the gist of why nobody has ever bothered enough to claim it. Over 99% of Earth's unclaimed land is all right here, which is kinda boring because visiting it is difficult, nobody lives anywhere close to it, and Antarctica wasn't even discovered until 200 years ago, so it all kinda makes sense why nobody would have ever bothered here. The other unclaimed lands, on the other hand, are much more interesting, because despite being a lot smaller in area, one is located on the continent where humanity began in the first place. Which is odd, because you'd figure somebody would have gotten around to it already. It's located right here in Africa, and it's called Bir Tawil. Despite being sandwiched in between Egypt in the north with a population of 100 million people and Sudan in the south with a population of 43 million people, neither government claims Bir Tawil, and neither does any other country, person, or entity on the planet.
Things that make you go, Like, don't that, like, make y'all go, antennas go up and be like, so this amount of people lives here, this amount of people lives here, astronomical amounts of people live in both places, but nobody seemed to meet in the middle. Nobody seemed to, you know what I mean, stomp the yard through here. Nobody seemed to stumble upon or sneak off and find this place. Nah, I'm good, homie. I don't need to go here. Nope. That just screams to me something ain't right.
Not a single person lives here, and it's about the size of Luxembourg in Europe. Because nobody lives here, there aren't any roads, towns, or any development whatsoever. It's literally just an empty Luxembourg-sized plot of land in the middle of the Sahara Desert, full of absolutely nothing but sand and rocks. Since there isn't any government and there aren't any laws, it means that you can basically just show up here and then do whatever you want, including attempting to create your own country, and many have already tried that. In 2014, an American dad from Virginia showed up and claimed to have established the Kingdom of North Sudan in Bir Tawil with a flag that was designed by his kids. A few months later after that, a couple Russian guys showed up, planted a Russian flag, and claimed to have established the creatively named Kingdom of Middle Earth. And then in 2017, an Indian guy showed up and claimed to have established the Kingdom of Dixit after his last name and planted his own flag.
All right, y'all, look these people up, because I'm assuming they're all dead. That's just an assumption of mine. They're all dead. We got to figure out if they're not.
All three of these guys' claims to Beer to Wheel overlap with one another, and there's been some great Twitter squabbling between them in the past. And I plan on joining them in the future by claiming Beer to Wheel as the Kingdom of Real Life Lore, or the KRLL for short. Of course, I have never visited Beer to Wheel, but that hasn't stopped dozens of people from claiming it before in the past, and it doesn't stop you from claiming it yourself down in the comments either with your own clever name. The point being is that anybody can claim Beer to Wheel for themselves, but actually enforcing those claims is rather difficult because A, it's an empty plot of desert in the middle of the Sahara and there aren't any roads leading to it from anywhere else, so getting there is quite challenging. B, it's a hostile desert in the middle of the Sahara with no infrastructure or development, and therefore living there is almost impossible. And C, in order to be a recognized country, you actually need a permanent population and infrastructure like airports or roads to get that permanent population there, which is hard if you don't have any resources. Maybe after Jeff Bezos conquers space, he'll come after Beer to Wheel and turn it into his own personal little kingdom. But how is this even possible in the first place? Why does this relatively large chunk of unclaimed land on humanity's original starting continent even exist?
That's the question.
Well, for that, as with all things, we can thank the British and go back a couple hundred years to see why. In the early 19th century, Egypt was theoretically a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, but they were pretty much just completely autonomous and doing their own thing. Like invading and conquering Sudan without necessarily getting any approval from the Ottomans in Constantinople. The Egyptians conquered and then ruled Sudan themselves for decades, and not exactly being fans of this occupation, the local Sudanese started a rebellion against them in the 1870s. By that point, the Suez Canal had already been built in Egypt, and that gave the British Empire a huge transportation shortcut between their possession of India and the British Isles themselves, and British interests in Egypt were growing bigger and bigger with every passing day. Eventually, by 1882, the British were worried that Egypt was falling out of their sphere of influence and determined to hold on to the Suez Canal at all costs and by any means. The British invaded and transformed Egypt into a virtual British protectorate. But by doing this, the British had also just thrust themselves into the rebellion that was going on in Sudan against the long-standing Egyptian rule. Because Egyptian rule now also meant British rule. But what was supposed to just be a quick and easy adventure to shut down the rebellion in the Sudan turned into an 18-year-long quagmire for both the British and the Egyptians. Sudan was completely overrun by the rebel forces and remained that way for 18 years until 1898. When it took a combined British and Egyptian army equipped with modern machine guns and artillery to reconquer it. Afterwards, Egypt remained effectively a British protectorate while Sudan was transformed into something called a condominium. Basically just a colony, but it was jointly ruled by both the Egyptians and the British. However, it really all just basically meant that Britain now controlled both countries, since Egypt co-ruled Sudan, but they were also just a protectorate of Britain at the same time. And so, the British decided that they needed to draw a border to finally settle where Egypt ended and Sudan began. The problem with that was, like with every other border the British came up with on foreign continents and between foreign peoples, was that A, they didn't have satellites, and B, they didn't really understand or care what they were actually doing. The year after the British and Egyptians reconquered Sudan, they came up with this political boundary between the two colonies, a straight line across the 22nd parallel of latitude. However, this line sucked because it was arbitrarily drawn by some guy in London thousands of miles away, and it cut directly through land that nomadic tribes used on both sides, and it was thought that the tribe who used this area was more culturally Egyptian, while the tribe who used this area was more culturally Sudanese. So, in a very rare instance of the British Empire realizing that their initial border didn't exactly make very much sense, they came up with a revised zigzaggy administrative boundary in 1902 that was separate from the political border that was drawn up 3 years earlier, which gave this familiar Beer to Wheel area to Egypt and this bigger area called the Halaib Triangle over to Sudan. Now, for decades, this never really mattered very much because Egypt and Sudan were both effectively ruled by the British anyway. But that began to change by the mid-20th century. Specifically by 1956, the global attitude toward colonialism had greatly shifted and the British left Egypt and Sudan to themselves. Both were now freshly independent nations, and both of them had to choose between two different choices for what their border could legally be. For Egypt, option A was the 1899 line, which gave them Halaib and gave Sudan Bir Tawil, while option B was the 1902 line, which gave them Bir Tawil and gave Sudan Halaib. Meanwhile, for Sudan, their choices were just the reverse of these. Option A was the 1899 line, which gave them Bir Tawil and gave Egypt Halaib, while option B was the 1902 line, which gave them Halaib and gave Egypt Bir Tawil. In effect, both Sudan and Egypt were forced into a rather unique legal situation where they had to choose between either Halaib or Bir Tawil, but absolutely not both. It could only be one, and naturally, just by looking at the map, you can understand why both of them wanted to choose Halaib. It's about 10 times more land than Bir Tawil. There were actually about 1,000 or so people who lived there, compared with Bir Tawil's nobody, and most importantly, Halaib has a nice coastline along the Red Sea, while Bir Tawil is completely landlocked. Halaib is indisputably the more valuable piece of land, and as a result, Egypt insisted that the true border was the 1899 straight line, while Sudan insisted that the true border was the 1902 wiggly line. For decades, Sudan and Egypt both just shared Halaib and kind of administered it together, sort of like a condominium. This status quo never really became a big issue until 1992, though, when the worst possible thing for the region's geopolitics could have happened. You guessed it, oil was discovered in the territorial waters in the Red Sea directly next to Halaib. So, whoever controlled Halaib would also control these potential...
Greed, bro. Destroys a lot of things that we learned about in history, man. Greed. It always dates back to greed. Oil, man. As Dave says, oil.
Oil reserves, and neither Sudan or Egypt were particularly in the mood to share. Sudan tried to jump ahead of Egypt by granting exploration rights to a Canadian petroleum company. Egypt declared that that was illegal, and then using the 1899 border as a pretext, they moved in troops to occupy Halaib. Sudan retaliated to this by allegedly attempting to assassinate Egypt's then president in 1996 while he was out visiting Ethiopia, and Egypt retaliated to that by kicking out all Sudanese police and officials from Halaib. In 2000, with tensions at an all-time high, Sudan decided to withdraw all of their officials from the Halaib area, and it's been de facto controlled by Egypt ever since. Although Sudan continues to claim it and shows it marked as being a part of Sudan on all official Sudanese maps. Egypt has since tried to strengthen their claim on the land by investing more than $60 million into infrastructure development projects, and just a couple years ago in 2019, they also attempted to sell oil and gas exploration rights in the waters off Halaib in the Red Sea, to which Sudan made a bunch of legal threats about. So, yeah, that's why Bir Tawil exists as a lawless no-man's zone in between them. If either Sudan or Egypt moved in to occupy Bir Tawil, it would immediately mean forfeiting their claim to the much more valuable Halaib.
That place gonna rot before either one of them do that. It's gonna rot.
Triangle, and neither side has ever been willing to make that sacrifice for more than 65 years now. And no other country could really bother claiming it either because, well, like I said earlier, it's a tiny, undeveloped, unpopulated, and landlocked plot of empty desert full of nothing but sand and rocks in the middle of two other countries.
At this point, these two countries is playing chess. They playing chess. It's a waiting game to see who's gonna make a move so they can claim the other land. Like, it's a chess game at this point. You see that? You see the pettiness?
But if you're still determined to travel to Bir Tawil anyway and claim your own country here, you're going to need a few things, like roads and airports for transportation, along with farms and restaurants to feed your population. In order to attract that population with your restaurants, you need to actually be able to create some delicious food so people will actually want to come.
Ain't that look good? Ain't that look good? Don't that look good? Ain't that look good?
And in order to do that, you need to actually have some good cooking equipment. And the best place to get some of that is over at Made In. Look, I really used to hate cooking because prepping and...
Did he just hit me like that? Did he just do me like that? Let's get back to the story. I was like, what? Where is he taking us? I think that was the end of the video, bro. He just dropped us off like that. Yeah. Listen, man. I don't think Beer to Will is gonna get occupied. I think people just gonna keep showing up, plotting their flags and claiming that. Like I still said, we need to check on them 3 men and see. And most importantly, where were they from again? Because that could be another part of that chess move to try to get somebody to fake out like they're going for it, for them to say, oh, now it's yours and we have this. So I don't know, but that's crazy. It's crazy. You see what happened when that oil came into play, bro? Ain't nobody letting go of that. Greed, money. That's all it boils down to, fam. Y'all get at me in the comment section, man. Some of y'all fell asleep during history class. Not just me. But y'all get at me in the comment section. Let me know what y'all thought of this video. Very, very, very. I didn't know that. Had not a clue. Not saying I was heading over there or anything like that, but it's always good to pick up little tidbits of information to know what's going on. All right? So why nobody wants this part of Africa? Y'all let me know. It's your boy L. Till next reaction, I'm gone. Peace.